Okay, so hello again, everyone. Thank you for continuing with us, and thank you for all who are joining us now newly to join the second session of our World Environment Day 2021 international webinar. For the newly joining participants, I'm introducing myself. I'm Dr. Hebatallah, Associate Professor and Academic Dean of GSIA and the Executive Director of Jindal Center for the Global South, and I'm responsible of moderating today's webinar. I feel greatly honored to welcome in this session our eminent guest speaker, Professor Kazi Sohag. He is Associate Professor and Head of the PhD program at the Graduate School of Economics Management at Ural Federal University in Russian Federation. Professor Sohag is also an adjunct research fellow at the School of Commerce, University of Southern Queensland in Australia, and an associated research fellow at Accounting Research Institute in Malaysia. He is an external researcher at the Center of Research Excellence in Renewable Energy and Power System at King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And Professor Kazi has obtained his PhD in Environmental Economics from the National University of Malaysia in 2017. And according to REPAC, Professor Kazi is the top 5th and the top 9% economist in Russia and the world, respectively, based on the last 10 years publication. He is regular reviewer of more than 50 high-impact journals, and his H index is 17, where the total citation is 1,562. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have with us in this second session of our World Environment Day 2021 webinar, Professor Sohag, to share with us his expert opinion on a very important topic, environmental policy and ecological footprint, linkage, migration measures of renewable energy, and innovation. So this session also is going to be divided into two parts. We are going to start by the presentation by our guest speaker, and then we'll move to the Q&A section at the end. So I request all our attendees to prepare the questions, and if they are able to, or if they are having access from their end, to write it in the chat box. Otherwise, you can raise your hand, and at the end you can tell your questions to our guest speaker. So this session is recorded, and it is going to be available on our YouTube session, our YouTube channel. And finally, now I'm pleased to hand over the talk to Professor Sohag. Professor Sohag.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor for inviting me such a very important occasion concerning the environment, as the whole world is fighting for it. So let me share my screen. So you can see it, right? Is it okay?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So though it is some sort of keynote speech, but I prefer to talk about something very empirical aspects of environment. So this is one of my ongoing research. The topic that is entitled the Environmental Policy and Ecological Footprint Linkage. So I try to consider the two channels, that's the mitigation measures of renewable energy and innovation. So that's the two channels I'm going to consider. So the very first things I'm going to start with the motivation of the study, that what basically motivate me to conduct this study. The first thing is that as we know that human demand for the natural endowment is augmenting, is increasing along with the economic growth. Because after the industrial time, this more the growth philosophy or the growth, economic growth requires a lot of natural resources because energy is like a kind of a bloodline for this new economic growth paradigms because we need energy for the industrialization. So that's why there are a lot of fracking booms is taking place, a lot of shale activities is taking place, and all this sort of energy is basically is containing carbon. So when you're burning this sort of energy, it releases emission that's coming to the atmosphere. So when it is released in the atmosphere, meaning that lower layer, it's containing the carbon, meaning when the sunlight is coming, the earth is losing the albedo because it cannot reflect going back. So when this carbon content is absorbing this sunlight, that is basically the reason for the global warming. And eventually the climate is change is taking place. So the many coastal countries are badly sufferer because of the sea level is rising. So that's why the whole world is there is some sort of political consensus that come to a point that there should be some sort of mitigation and adaptation measures to fight with these climates. So mainly in one approach that has to be done that the human induced climate change that has to be curbed by the mitigation measures. So the economic growth process has to be more friendly with the environment. And another one is that we cannot do anything with mitigation, but we have to adapt since the climate change is taking place. So mitigation measures is not enough. So we have to live with that, but we have to increase the adaptability. So reducing the risk of this climate change. So that's why the mitigation and adaptation measures. So most of the prior studies, basically, when they're talking about the externalities of economic growth, they're focusing on very particular measures, let's say carbon emission or the pollutions. So that's a very minor or very partial, it's not holistic measures to show the health of the environment. That's why we're focusing on the ecological footprint, which is much more comprehensive to show the health of the environment. So I will come back to this point that how the ecological footprint is measured and what does it mean. So since the climate change is taking place, so many countries adopted a lot of environmental policies. So these policies some are the market based and some are the non-market based. So that's why there should be some sort of study to see the effectiveness of these environmental policies. So far I saw some few prior literature that's mainly focus on this policy effectiveness in promoting some sort of renewable energies or other aspects, but merely there is no paper or best of my knowledge that the effectiveness of the environmental policies curbing the ecological footprint. That's why that basically motivates me to conduct this study. So what is ecological footprint? So ecological footprint is that the human demand on the nature in one hand, and another one is that also human beings are not only using the natural resources, they are also dumping a lot of emissions, a lot of waste. So the earth system, it needs to power the absorbing capacity. So I can give you a tiny example. Let's say if you have a little pond and if there are some fishes, so let's say fish is growing up, that's a biological production with maybe sometimes the geometric growth rate. If you are not going to extract catching the fish, but if your rate of catching the fish is more than the production rate, so what's going to happen? It's a depletable, there will be no fishes. So that's a question about the sustainability. That's why the renewable energies or renewable resources, environmental endowments, you have to optimize the rate of extractions, like a forest. You have to see the growth rate, and then what is the optimum extraction rate that has to be find out optimized. Otherwise, that's a big threat for the sustainability, meaning that present generation can use it, but the future generation will have nothing if the extraction rate is higher than the production rate. So that's why ecological footprint is a very holistic measures that how much natural resources we are extracting from the nature. And the supply side is basically the biocapacity, meaning that your territory, what is their power or the capacity to reproduction or reproduce these natural resources that the human being are extracting. So some are, there is no completely exhaustible, depletable, so you cannot regenerate. For example, land, area of the land. So when you are going to have a resettlement buildings, you cannot expand the land. Only the case you can make it as a vertical development, like tall buildings, but you cannot horizontally, you cannot expand. So that's why there are several policies. So the supply side, the biocapacity in general is, it indicates that your territory or the nature, that's power of reproducing the resources, and as well as that absorbing capacity, whether, let's say, carbon emission, when it is releasing, whether you have enough forest to absorb this carbon emission or not. So I will show in the diagram how it is working. So if you see this ecological footprint, is one is the energy mainly. So because we are extracting many types of energy, coal, then petroleum and gas. So this type of the energy also varies about their carbon contents, like which is more environmental friendly or less environmental friendly. As you know, the coal it contains more carbon. So if you are going to produce electricity from the coal, so it's a more pollutant compared to gas, natural gas. Then resettlement, and also the people are extracting or the cutting down, the logging the trees to make the timbers as we need it. Then also the land, like a food, a fiber and seafood. So ecological footprint is considering or accounts all type of things that human beings are extracting from the nature and its externality as well. So I'm just giving you the diagram because my study focus on the OECD countries. So this ecological footprint is a kind of a index. So this index represents that which country extracting more or more on they need the natural endowment more comparing other countries. So if you see this, some countries, including Australia, most of them the OECD countries, all of them the OECD countries. So if you look at the USA, United States, where the ecological footprint is very high compared to some countries like Poland, like Finland, where it is relatively low, Hungary, so Japan. In some countries, the ecological footprint is extremely high. So then I created another diagram. So this diagram basically shows that biocapacity and minus ecological footprint. So if there is a positive figure, is the positive index indicating that this country is enjoying the biocapacity more than the ecological footprint. So meaning that that territory still have more power to produce renewable energies or the renewable resources in nomad. So in this context, it's a very shocking diagram. If you see, only the few countries has the balance or the surplus of biological capacity. So one of them is Australia, having our biocapacity higher than ecological footprint. Then perhaps Sweden, Canada, so Finland. So it is, and most probably those countries is enjoying the positive biocapacity more than ecological footprint is basically the maybe territory of the country is higher or the density of population is lower. So if you see the Australia, because it's a quite vast territory like Canada, so still this territory have a surplus of biocapacity than ecological footprints. So that's basically the essence of this diagram. So in curbing the human economic externalities, so many countries have taken environmental policies. So this policy is stringency. This is also an index from 0 to 6. So from this diagram, we can see that which country is taking a more severe or more stronger environmental policy stringency. So it shows most of the OECD countries is the policy is going up, meaning that it's going to be strengthened. So government is reinforcing these policies compared to some countries. There are some sort of declining in some countries. I don't know exact reason why it is going down in some country like Spain. But in general, it's an upward trending. So over the time, it is almost sure that the country is taking more, they strengthen the environmental policy stringency. So how this is environmental policy stringency indicator is produced from by the OECD think tank. If you look at most of these countries, they have taken two types of policies. One is the market-based policy. So market-based policy, so that's the first thing is the tax. So the market policy, they are giving a weight like 0.5, 50%. So if then there is a sub point or the sub weight, and the sub weight is 25% is coming from the taxes. So many countries imposing the tax on carbon tax, as you know, that's a very famous one. Then emission trading scheme. So emission trading scheme, like if you have some sort of carbon permission, that's, let's say you have a company, you can release like 100 tons carbon emissions. So if you are not doing that, still if you have a surplus, you can sell this surplus to other company that needs. So this is how a government can curb or limit some particular amount of carbon by the policy. Then FITS, then it is kind of a perhaps some sort of special government focus to provide some loans to promote solar energy or wind energy. As you know, the financial, because under the free market, many companies or the private sector may not be interested to produce the renewable energy. Because since you can buy the fossil fuel with a cheaper price, then why you should use the renewable energy like a solar panel? So that's why you should have some sort of financial incentive. As an individual, you'll always see the cost and benefit rather than the social cost and social benefits. So as an individual, we may not react according to the market. So the market and the free market, that's kind of a failure. So the government need to intervene. The financial market should intervene. That okay, they should promote that the green activities, including producing renewable energy or the wind energy, some sort of things. Then another one is DRS, that deposit return schemes. If you visited like European countries, let's say if your government is discouraging the plastic use, like a plastic bottle. So in some shops, you know, what they do, they take a deposit. If you are going to buy water, bottled water, so what they're going to do, they are taking the more price. So then when you are returning the bottle to the shops, they are refunding that money. So this is the way to collect this plastic so that they can dump in a particular place. So I do not know the suitability of these policies in developing countries, but this is a very nice practice that people are following this practice in the many European countries and OECD countries. And the non-market based policies are very straightforward. That's the carbon limit, like the government is imposing a restriction that you cannot emit this amount. So that's a permit. That's a command and kind of a command and control. So that's a non-market based policies. And also the government is providing the subsidies for the renewable energy production or the technological advancement that is which is environmental friendly. So out of all these measures that a country is taking, so all these measures, this OECD think tank, they produces this environmental policy stringency to see that to strengthen of the policy how stronger it is in curbing the um, externalities, negative externalities of economic activities. So we saw some literature review. Mostly there is no direct literature that talked about that environmental policy stringency's effectiveness in reducing ecological footprint, but mostly with the renewable energy. And this is very contrasting findings, and sometimes some study that found a positive relation, some are negative, and some may be insignificant impact. So that's why these contrasting findings also motivates me to see it more rigorously in improving the methodological skills or contextualizing more important variables like that. So based on our understanding, uh, I come up with some model specifications. So EF, it indicates that ecological footprint is a function of EPI, environmental policy stringency, and I have taken the economic growth as well. Then two important channel, that is renewable energy, then technological advancement and the population density. So that's the function of ecological footprint. Then I try to do some more robustness check or the cross-sectional test to see that how this model is working for a country when the ecological footprint is higher than the biocapacity, and the countries that's enjoying the biocapacity, whether the policy stringency somehow differ from this set of country to another set of country. As we see from the diagram, that some countries are enjoying biocapacity and other countries where the ecological footprint is higher than biocapacity. Then also I try to segregate the sample into more industrialized and more service oriented. So whether the environmental policy stringency is somehow sensitive with the nature of the economic growth of the country. So these are the model I come up with based on the anecdotal evidence. So in order to do that, I have taken, these are the measures variables. So dependent variable in this study is the ecological footprint index, and independent variable or the policy variable. That's obvious, that environmental policy stringency. This index is from 0 to 6, and you see that weight from all the measures of market-based and non-market-based and all individual policies. In terms of the mitigation measures, I have taken two measures. That's the renewable energy, because it is often the renewable energy is a non-carbon content energy, except biomass. Perhaps biomass contains some sort of carbon emission, a carbon content, but it's not that much like a fossil fuel or the natural gas or coal, of course. And innovation, so innovation energy efficiency is paramount in mitigating the adversity of the economic growth of the carbon or energy. And as for the demographic variable, I have taken the population density. and some important the cross-sectional variable that I was talking about in the model specification. So based on the biocapacity surplus, I make a two sample with the country with enjoying the biocapacity and those who are suffering the deficit of the biocapacity, and the industrial value addition, higher and lower. So in terms of the selecting methodologies, I follow a kind of a order that since it is the data is coming from the OECD countries, that's our sample countries, and you know that's a very strong association. So it's association meaning that in the panel data, panel time series data, when you're working on the panel time series data, so previous all this study, they ignore the cross-sectional dependency issues, which is a very important thing. Cross-sectional dependency is more about if one country, something happening like economic booming in one country, then perhaps there is a spillover effect with the partner country. So if the country over the time following a trend, so that will create some sort of common correlation. This common correlation is mostly ignored with the earlier literature, but it has to be contextualized in the model, because rationally or anecdotally, one country can influence another country in terms of the policy, in terms of the trade, economic growth. So there is a lot of observed spillover effect and unobserved spillover effect. So that has to be contextualized in the model. So we did it. So if we find the presence of the cross-sectional dependency, then we should apply panel unit rotates, but we cannot apply the first generation. We have to apply second generation panel unit root test that can capture the biasness that may created because of the spatial dependency or the common correlation. And if we find that data is not stationary, meaning that time plays a role, it's not a static, more about dynamic, in that case, we have to proceed with the dynamic approach. So that dynamic approach can solve the cross-sectional dependency as well as the time effect, dynamic effect. So I will talk about these things, how it's going to be done. So the first step, we see all these variable, whether there is a cross-sectional dependency or not, by this equation. That equation is mainly the T stands for the time, and it stands for the country, cross countries. And P is kind of a correlation. So in every variable, whether is when I have taken all the OECD countries, over the time, is there any common nature or not? So it is very much expected that there should be some sort of common correlation as long as it is OECD have a significant trade and financial integration. So if we find the presence of the cross-sectional dependency, we should apply second generation panel unit root. So unlike the conventional unit root test, this unit root considered the cross-sectional dependency like this, Y bar, indicating that the common correlation terms of all this country over the time by 1 year lag, and also by taking the difference. So by taking this difference, then if this B equals to 1, then it's going to it indicates there is a unit root. So once you have a unit root problem, then we cannot apply a static model. Rather, we have to apply the dynamic model. But in the case, if some variables having a unit root like beta equals to 1 and some variables are stationary, meaning that time is not playing that role. So that's kind of a mixed order of integration. If you have this kind of a scenario problem, then the solution we can apply the cross-sectional dependency or to regressive model. This model is capable to address the problem of creating a mixed order of integration as well as that common correlation effect, that is this cross-sectional dependency. This model also powerful to provide you the long-run effect and short-run effect. So for example, what is short run, long run? So when a country is taking environmental policy, this policy may not have an immediate impact on ecological footprint because ecological footprint is not that responsive con contemporaneous time, like immediately, is not going to respond. So since it is yearly data, so that we expect that maybe there is some sort of marginal effect of environmental policy, but there is a long run effect. The long run effect that the over the time horizon. So another short run effect is a very immediate impact. So we try to find out the short run impact and long run impact, as well as that the expected impact, that how the ecological footprint respond with the environmental policy over the time. And if it is not taking place immediately in time, then the model should adjust. This is the adjustment rate, meaning since it is not in the equilibrium when the policy is taking place, since in ecological footprint cannot respond 100%, but let's say 25%. So the market should adjust toward the long run. That's why we have also taken the adjustment rate, how the market is adjusting toward the long run equilibrium. So this is the empirical findings of our variable. First is the ecological footprint. If you can see that city test, that's a cross-sectional dependency or a spatial dependency. We can see that value is quite high. So the null hypothesis was that all this country ecological footprint is independent. So one country is not going to influence another country. So this null hypothesis is rejected, meaning that one country influence another country when it is OECD country is concerned. So we found a strong evidence of the cross-sectional dependency and their average correlation over the time around 41%. So then if you see that environmental policy, also there is a cross-sectional dependency and its correlation even higher than ecological footprint, around 81%. Then renewable energy also, it depends, there is a spillover effect from one country to another country, and its average correlation of around 73%, as well as the innovation and GDP growth, of course. So GDP growth, that average correlation even higher, around 91%. So which is sensible because this is OECD countries, they have a significant integration through the trade and financial aspects. So one can expect a higher correlation among these OECD countries over time. And mostly all the variables, we found that it is not stationary at level, but they are stationary after the first difference. So it's more about a dynamic model. We cannot apply any static model. So after the dynamic model, this is the first model, empirical results. So this is the coefficient. Here it shows the model 1, 2, 3. It basically cross-sectional dependency in this model is solved only in the short run. And this model cross-sectional dependency addressed both only in the long run. And this one, we address this problem both in the short run and long run. So when you solve the cross-sectional dependency short and long run, we found that error correction, the adjustment rate is higher than these two models. So that's the good news. So adjustment rate is quite high, around 70% per year towards the long run equilibrium. And importantly, that's a striking findings that environmental policy helps to reduce the ecological footprint. So the policy that OECD country adopted, it's playing a significant role in reducing ecological footprint. So that's the good news. Then regarding the renewable energy, we also find that renewable energy is significantly reducing ecological footprint in the long run. This is all of the long run parameters. But the thing is, GDP growth basically fostering or spurring the ecological footprint. That's something bad. And if you see this magnitude of coefficient higher, if you combine all of them together, still this is higher. So this is a shocking news that innovation basically not helping ecological footprint. So though the more innovation, maybe in marginal cases, it can increase the energy efficiency. But in absolute terms, though technology is expanding or augmenting, the energy use is not decreasing, though the economy is significantly achieving the energy efficiencies. But in terms of the total volume of energy production and emission, it is still increasing. So we found that innovation is not helping when over the sample is concerned. And population density is some sort of negative, and we try to give the argument that why population density may help, because when there is urbanization, instead of the people are very scattered in the over the land, so density may higher, but if there is a proper management in the smart city, that may reduce that negative impact of the density of the population. So that is the main argument here. Then when you check the cross-sectional test, like we segregate our sample into the countries that enjoying the biocapacity and another sample that biocapacity is deficit. So mostly all the coefficient, the sign and magnitude somewhat remain same except innovation. So in the country, the biocapacity higher, deficit, basically in this country innovation is not working, is not, rather it is it fosters the ecological footprint. But the country having a biocapacity surplus, we found the evidence that innovation is playing a big role in reducing the ecological footprint. So it depends on the country's market structures or their priority, what kind of technology they are producing, whether it is environmental friendly or not. That's the questions. Because we have taken the data of the patents, so we are not sure that what type of patent it is, whether it is a green technological innovation or not. So that's the question here. So, but it provides a solid evidence that the country is enjoying the biocapacity, where environmental policy, of course, is working significantly. Then renewable energy also comes here the negative significant, but it's become insignificant. But importantly, innovations become negative and significant. So in this sample of country, innovation is playing the big role as a mitigation measures. So that's the important finding, but somewhat the population densities become positive, but here is a negative. So it somehow confirms that we should not put all the country together, rather subsampling this cross-sectional, dividing it more logical to find the unbiased estimator. And when we split our sample into high industrialization and low industrializations, and you see that high industrializations in this country, basically innovation is not that helping in reducing ecological footprints, but here the lower industries. So these countries are more service-oriented countries. So in the service-oriented countries, it is more environmental friendly rather than the highly industrialized countries. So what is the important thing is that innovation or renewable energy, it is sensitive with other characteristics of the country. So it depends on the magnitude or the intensity of industrializations, whether it is low or high, as well as that the country's biocapacity, like the Australia, where the country biocapacity higher than ecological footprints. So Based on my empirical results, we come up with some sort of policy implication. So first of all, that our empirical findings, since it affirms that policy stringency is very important role in curbing the ecological footprint, that's why it's obvious that it reinforces the importance of the environmental policy stringency that has to be strengthened more vigorously to protect to increase the health of improve the health of environment. That's very obvious. And both market-based and non-market-based policies can be adopted depending on the institutional acceptance, because many countries maybe market-based approach may not work, because market-based approach, it depends on the institutional quality. Because the country with a poor institutional quality, market-based approach may not work, because people may try to evade some sort of tax. Uh, so it depends on the institutional quality. So I cannot generalize these findings over the all countries, apart from the OECD countries, in the context of the like a developing countries, because we have to consider the institutional aspects in that case. And lastly, given the finding that renewable energy is more profound comparing technological innovation over the sample countries in curbing ecological footprint, that's why this is paramount importance that countries should focus on producing renewable energy. So that's the future. But renewable energy, as I said, is not working under the free market approach. So that's why the financial market and the government policy should be embedded somehow to foster the renewable energy production by providing some sort of schemes or subsidies. So that's the important aspects. So thank you very much for your patience, and if you have any question, I'm open for you.
Thank you so much, Professor Kazi, for your for sharing with us this insightful research and all this information that you have shared from your research. So we are really grateful for this and making your time to be with us. There was a question raised in chat box from Firdos. So Firdos is asking how rational we are to choose between social or personal benefits, how it is working between developed and developing countries, how can we make them in line to choose better one from personal to social and to overcome the global environmental challenges. There is one hand is raised also.
Okay, maybe I can answer this question first.
Okay.
That's a very important question, and it's a very lot of theoretical debate about the individual cost and social cost, individual benefit, social benefit. There are a lot of books, environmental evaluation. So the country, like it depends on the people awareness. So whether I see that in the developing country, like they're not littering, they are not throwing any rubbish on the roads because they are aware about the environment. They know the social cost. So they care about the social cost than the individual one. So that's why they are reacting in that way. But in developing countries, so whether the people are aware about the environment or not, that's the question. So awareness or environmental education, that's a paramount tool, I think. Awareness coming first. If the people are not going to respond rationally, socially, that is acceptable, then no policy is not going to work.
Yes, right. So awareness is the most important thing, especially in developing countries. So Mr. Vikas Kumar, you have a question. Please unmute yourself and raise your question. Mr. Vikas Kumar. Okay, Mr. Kazi Musa.
Yes, Doctor. Yeah, I want to ask, like in OECD countries, they're applying maybe market-based policy or non-market-based policy. But my question is about developing country like South Asian country, SAARC country. So which policy could be more uh, good for this sort of countries?
Yeah. So that's a very interesting question. The effectiveness of this environmental policy stringency. First of all, OECD countries, they can afford many type of policy. Those are maybe the counterproductive with the economic growth. But in the context of the developing country, the first priority is coming the economic growth, living standard, per capita income, rather than the environment. So let's say if the government is going to impose carbon tax, so the cost of production will be higher for all the companies or all the industries. So higher cost when they are going to bear, it may create unemployment problem. So whether the economy can afford this kind of a cost or not, that's the questions. That's why it's not a very obvious answer that whether the developing country can take all these policies, whether economically is viable or the feasible or not. That's why based on the country structure, economic structure, there can be a feasible study to see that which policy can be more effective. I believe all these policies that OECD countries adopting may not be suitable for developing countries. But yes, promoting renewable energy can be a choice, like the solar panel, even in the household level, that's a one grid or off grid. So if the government can promote financial market comes to help the people to have a solar panel, so that can be a good approach, I think, rather than imposing carbon tax.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kazil. Yes, like it's very hard for the developing country to follow European style, but yes, must they have to find some policy.
Alternative measures,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kazi Musa, for your question. And Mr. Vikas Kumar, are you able to unmute yourself? Any other question before we end this session? I think Mr. Vikas is not able to unmute himself.
Perhaps, hello. Perhaps
Yes.
Sir Sanathan Mike is with us. Maybe he is having some point he can share.
Okay, really, I still there? So Professor
Yes, yes.
Sanat.
Good afternoon, Kaji sir. Actually, I said to you and asked to you, please uh, reply to me quick and easy mitigation of carbon reducing.
Okay. So what is the mitigation approach to reduce the carbon emission, right? So carbon, basically, who is the major contributor of the carbon? It's coming from the energy industry. So most of the country, when they are producing the energy or generating energy from the fossil fuel or carbon content energy, that's the main source of the carbon emissions. So somehow if you can replace with the renewable energy, like a solar or wind energy or the hydro energy, so that is more friendly. So I think that's the easiest way to curbing carbon emission.
Thank you, sir. I satisfy from your answer. But another question is a chief method of carbon emission reducing method.
Uh, I think cheapest nowadays, given the technological advancement, perhaps the renewable energy production is going to be very cheaper. In terms of the solar energy, so far I know many developing countries adopted these measures. For example, they are buying the solar panel, they're installing on the roof of the building, and they are getting this energy. But there is one thing that people should consider, the policymaker think very carefully, that they are using some sort of dry cells or the battery. Inside the battery, there may be some sulfuric acid or the lead acid. So acid deposition, there should be a proper management, because the longevity of this battery may be a few years. So then how they are going to dump it in wire, there should be a different policy of these things.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you. Professor Sanatan, do you like to raise some questions or to leave some comments before we end?
You have to
unmute, please, yourself. Yes, Professor Sanatan, do you like to leave some comments before we end? I think it is an internet connection. I'm sorry for this. So thank you so much, Professor Sohag. It was really great and nice presentation and lovely discussion with our attendees. So Professor Sanatan, would you like to say something? Okay, so I would like to express really my gratitude for you, Professor Kazi, for accepting my invitation in short time and managing your time to be with us today. I'm really gratitude for all your efforts and that you are here with us today and making our event to be successful. So I really appreciate this and thank you so much. And I'm thankful also for all our participants today. Please stay with us, and we are going to rejoin again at 6:30 with Professor Naveen Arora. So it is going to be our last session today. I'm going to leave in the chat box the feedback form for to get your participation certificate. So please, we end. I request you if you would like to take a gathering picture with